Hey everybody, Raspberry Barrel here, and we're going to be reading another biography of Mewni today. And we'll be continuing with our biographies by Infaminxy on DeviantArt. And today we'll be reading Blodewedd Butterfly, the Queen of Spring. The last biography we read was Samaria Butterfly, the Swords Woman. And just for a little recap for everyone, the Infaminxy queens do take place in the Jig 019 universe, but the queens are in like different orders and stuff. So we're going to be showing her family tree right here to give everyone a recap and understand. So in the family tree, it starts with Jig's Urana, then Solina, then Estellaria, then Hermera, and then it starts with the Infaminxy queens, and the first queen of Infaminxys that we have is Artemisa, and then we go to Cosmica, who is the mother of Flowicilia, who is the mother of Lunaria. Then it goes to Polaria the Navigator, then Ischia, then Universalia, then Scorpius, then Samaria. Her daughter is Skywyn, whose daughter is Febe, and then now we're on Blodewedd. So in our last biography, we read Samaria, but her daughter is going to be Skywyn, and then Skywyn's daughter is Febe, so we don't have biographies for them, but it's still basically the Jig 0109's stories, but you just gotta switch some names around and stuff. So okay, well, let's get started. Please go check out Infaminxy on DeviantArt. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noise in the background. Let's begin. Blodewedd, Queen of Spring. When nature was hurt, Blodewedd, Queen of Spring, was there to heal it. Blodewedd Butterfly, the Queen of Spring, born 2:29 a.m., died 2:90 a.m. Reigned from 247 to 269, married to Bodrick Flowers. Children, Supina Butterfly, Nebula Butterfly. Blodewedd Butterfly was born on a spring night just before sunrise in 229. She had green eyes from her father, Rowan, and pink hair as a mix of both her parents' hair colors. She had light salmon clouds on her cheeks, and her name meant Queen of Spring in High Median. Blodewedd was the first butterfly to not be raised with a father, making Febe extremely overprotective. Besides this, she was very close with Febe, and also her grandmother Skywyn. As seen in her childhood, Blodewedd absolutely loved nature. She spent most of her day in the castle gardens picking flowers, climbing trees, singing with the birds, among other things related to nature. Another striking feature of Blodewedd was that she was very good with communication with animals. While she couldn't directly speak to them, most animals understood her motions or what she was trying to tell them. Another thing that was noted about Blodewedd was her absolute love for spring, as it's known as the season of nature. While she did also enjoy summer, she would complain in fall and winter that it was too cold. When she was 8, the Mud Dweller rebellion started to get intense, and Febe was afraid of an ambush on the castle and that Blodewedd would get harmed or worse. Because of this, Febe sent Blodewedd to live with Lord and Lady Flowers for safety. Blodewedd was kindly greeted by the flowers, and the children were all very excited of her staying with them. The children were Iris, Melvick, and Bodrick. Iris was a fan favorite, carefree girl. Melvick was smart, intelligent, and a know-it-all, and Bodrick was kind, anxious, dorkish, and overanalyzed things. Out of all the siblings, Blodewedd had the closest bond with Bodrick. Despite his dorky and anxious personality, he was very kind to Blodewedd, and they found a lot of things in common. In 241, a few days after Blodewedd's 12th birthday, the Mud Dweller Rebellion War ended, and Blodewedd was able to return back to the castle. Febe, Skywyn, and Blodewedd were all very happy to see each other once again. On Blodewedd's wand ceremony in 245, she inherited the wand, which she named Spring Beacon. After the wand ceremony, she set off into the courtyard, where she found a wounded bird. She took the bird inside and helped it for the next few weeks. Her and the animal formed a close bond. When the bird was healed, it didn't want to leave, so she kept it as her pet and named him Floris. Blodewedd's wand, Spring Beacon. Her spells were related to things such as spring, flower petals, trees, birds, etc., but she also made a spell that was very remarkable that allowed the user to directly communicate with animals. Unfortunately, later that year, Skywyn passed away. Blodewedd mourned deeply and was very sad. In 246, Blodewedd befriended Mewla Waterson, and her, Mewla, and Bodrick started to hang out together. Soon, Blodewedd developed feelings for Bodrick and wanted to confess to him, but to complete misfortune, Mewla and Bodrick started a relationship. Blodewedd was happy for them, but was internally heartbroken and sad. Despite being in a relationship already, Blodewedd decided to confess to Bodrick a few months later, to which he sadly rejected her. Blodewedd walked away with teary eyes before Bodrick said, "You don't have to be so miserable about it." Blodewedd felt a strike anger, something she ever barely felt. She and Bodrick got into an argument which ended in Bodrick calling off their friendship. Blodewedd was miserable for the next 2 weeks, but then decided to try and move on from Bodrick, and she did. For the next few years she perfected her magic, and when the news came to her that Bodrick and Mewla broke up, dramatically, she realized her feelings for Bodrick disappeared, as she didn't care. In 250, a terrible drought came upon Mewni, leaving all crops dry and dead. Even worse, it was followed by a heat stroke. Many people started dying of dehydration and malnourishment. When Febe confronted King Ponyhead, he told her there was nothing he could do. Rain and storms could not come no matter how hard he tried. This also had effects on nature and killed animals and started wildfires, which had more of an effect on Blodewedd. She decided to take matters into her own hands and venture into the wild to try and find the source. Her parents refused her to go alone, so Blodewedd reached out to an old friend, Bodrick, and to her surprise, he said yes. Blodewedd and Bodrick survived using nothing but hunting skills, and Blodewedd used spells from Queen Cosmica. The first few days were awkward between them, and they barely talked, until one day they came across a village. Bodrick went off to one of the shops, and a man invited Blodewedd inside his hut for some tea, and Blodewedd agreed. The man drugged the tea, causing Blodewedd to faint. The man dragged Blodewedd's body into his room and proceeded to satisfy himself. Bodrick saw through the black window. He immediately chucked a rock at the window, breaking it, and jumped inside. He punched the man in the face on the ground. Blodewedd woke up just then and realized what had happened. Bodrick and her escaped and ran out the village into the forest. That same night, Blodewedd and Bodrick had their first conversation in years. Blodewedd thanked Bodrick for what he had done. While crying, she could barely even get out the words, as she was traumatized for what had happened. Bodrick hugged her while she cried. From that night on, the two reformed their friendship they once had. Blodewedd and Bodrick started to notice the deeper they got into the wilderness, the more humid and hot it became. They took this as a sign and continued on their journey. While bathing in the river at dusk one day, Bodrick accidentally walked in on Blodewedd. He embarrassedly apologized, covering his eyes, but Blodewedd invited him in. Without thinking twice, he did, and the two bathed together, sharing their first romantic tension. Later, when they were done, they returned to the cave they were staying in. The warm temperature, sunset, and coziness got the best of them, and they embraced their love for one another. After hiking for a week, the temperature raised to levels that were too hot. They could potentially cause dehydration, heartstroke, and death. Blodewedd erected a magical force field around her and Bodrick to avoid this. They reached the top of a mountain where the surrounding area was like that of a volcano. In the middle of it all was a cluster, an orange steaming crystal that emitted giant rays of heat. Blodewedd confirmed this the source and took her wand out. She opened a gap in the force field, chanted a sentence in High Communion, and fired a blast of pink energy with flowers, leaves, and birds flying out of it, exploding the crystal. The explosion sent Blodewedd and Bodrick flying through the air, thankfully to land in a pod. They both realized that temperature was back to normal, and animals began to appear. They celebrated with a kiss and started their way back to Mewni. When Blodewedd returned, her mother hosted her a grand ball in order to celebrate. Later, her and Bodrick got married, and Blodewedd became queen in the year 247. Blodwedd's first priority was to help nature that had been greatly affected by the drought and heat wave. She casted many spells to help regrow plants, trees, and grass, and even helped wounded animals. King Ponyhead also had rain fall and other storms come every so often. Blodwedd's crown. It took a while, but in 248 conditions were back to normal. 248 was also the year Blodewedd gave birth to her heiress Supina, a girl with pink hair and eyes with crosses on her cheeks. To celebrate the spring solstice in 245, she built a completely new garden. She grew all the plants herself with a wand and even put wildlife in the garden. The people decided to name it the Blodweddian Garden in honor of their queen. During several council meetings, Blodewedd started to notice hunting became more apparent. While this was necessary to gain food, it had increased to the point where Blodewedd felt nature was being hurt. She then pressed a law that you could not hunt certain animals unless hunting was a job. Sadly, in 260, Febe passed away as a victim of food poisoning. Blodewedd declared a week mourning. Mewni's first ever natural park was founded in spring of 261, when Blodewedd reserved a piece of land free of hunting and tree labor, where animals could live and tourists could visit. Blodewedd passed the wand to Supina in 262. She later discovered unexpectedly she was pregnant. Later that year, she gave birth to Nebula, a girl with salmon hair and pink eyes. Due to her daughter ending the plague in 266, Blodewedd allowed her to marry to a commoner, Osmond. In order to avoid conflict, a house was founded in his new name, Cross, in charge of health. Blodewedd passed the crown to Supina in 269. Blodewedd lived to see the birth of her granddaughter, Medusia, in 279, and Mira in 283. Blodewedd took it easy for the next few years of her life, mainly going out on walks in the garden, enjoying nature and watching wilderness, as well as going on vacations with Bodrick. Blodewedd died in 290 as a result of organ failure. She was buried next to her mother in the crypts of the castle, and Mewni mourned the death of Blodewedd, the Queen of Spring. Blodewedd in the Forest. And that was the biography of Blodewedd, the Queen of Spring by Infaminxy on DeviantArt. I hope you all enjoyed this biography, and go check out Infaminxy to see the rest of the art and stories. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time. And please like, share, and subscribe. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.